Hello, hello. Well, thank you and welcome to the lecture of Simona Malvezzi and Wilfried Kuehn. Simona Malvezzi, Wilfried Kuehn, and Johannes Kuehn founded Kuehn Malvezzi in Berlin in 2001. Just to put it in context, it was on the heels after a decade of more than a decade of reunification, and the reconstruction of Berlin was well on its way. Those who didn't know the situation, it was really about reconstructing, or more than a decade of reconstructing the perimeter block plan of Berlin, the reconstruction of the configuration of the city before the war. All the figured plazas were being rebuilt. And Ram Koolhaas at that time made this comment about Berlin government architecture in the 1990s. And he referred to it as an emphatically uncharismatic zone offering the reassurance that democracy is truly boring. So Kuehn Malvezzi basically started the practice around this type of milieu and this type of temperament of architecture. But I think in my mind, their work on one hand is deeply rooted in the tradition of this Germanic architecture, but there's something else that really permeates their work. And there's a quote by Hugo von Hofmannsthal talking about Vienna at Dürfen den Säckel, where he said that he never felt any conflict between the dark, serious, deeply moral Teutonic ideal and the sprightly, festive Latin aestheticism. And this is something that I see in Kuehn Malvezzi's work. And I don't know why, maybe because the principles are made out of, composed of Germans and Italians or Germans who studied in Italy. But I think it has many things to do with their multiple ways of practice. You know, they practice as architects, as designers, curators, writers, and educators. And I would say all of them with kind of equal amount of intensity and rigor. They have been involved with the art world very early on. They have designed many exhibitions and displays. One of the earliest work I've known they've done were the exhibition spaces for Documenta 11 at Kassel. They have designed shows for artists such as Klaus Odenberg, Alberto Giacometti, Dieter Roth, Andrea Fraser, Anna Mendieta, Simone Forti, or Walter Pickler, or for architects and designers such as Alvar Aalto, Carlo Molino, or Hans Hollein. They have also actively collaborated with artists from Maman Linke, Marko Lulic, Michael Rydell, or Candida Hoffer, and many more. And they have also designed and reorganized a series of contemporary art collections, such as the conversion of the industrial building in Düsseldorf for a time-based art collection, the Friedrich Flick collection in the Hamburger Bahnhof, the Museum Belvedere in Vienna, and the Museum Berggruen and the Museum of Decorative Arts in Berlin. Maybe we could switch CVs, is okay? Well, I think one project that really brought to my mind that really I paid attention to the work was the competition entry for the controversial Humboldt Forum building in Berlin, which is the reconstruction of the palace. That they won a special jury prize. And special jury prizes are important, especially in Berlin, because one think about the one that Leon Krier won for the Berlin Tegel master plan. Charles Moore won the project, but the Krier project was the one that was always discussed. And I think for the Kuehn Malvezzi, the special prize for the Humboldt Forum really showed a critical approach to reconstruction that gathered a great deal of attention. And subsequently, they were awarded the German Critics' Prize in Architecture for that. And I think at times where the issues of preservation and reconstruction is important, it was really a forward-thinking project. Recently, they have completed the extension to the Modern Gallery at the Saarland Museum, and also the collection for the Deutsche Bank and the Arts Collection on Berlin's Unter den Linden. Current projects include the interreligious House of One in Berlin, where a synagogue, a church, and a mosque is built under one roof, and then also the Insectarium in Montreal. So they design places for art, but also for insects. They are educators, they are writers. I'm very familiar with their writing. They wrote a lot about Matthias Ungers, Hans Hollein, Aldo Rossi, Adolf Loos, many figures that embrace progress, but always within a cultural tradition. So, and I think in many ways, the interest to these series of architects were also reflective in some of their ethos. Wilfried has been a professor at at Karlsruhe, and since last year, he's a professor of Technical University in Vienna, and Johannes is a professor at Bauhaus University of Weimar. And this year, they're visiting critics here at the GSD. So please join me to welcome Simona and Wilfried.
So thank you, Mark. As you said, we are actually three, but today we are two. So I start with the first part, and then Wilfried continue. So please don't go after my part. So can we switch the light off? Thank you. I think it's much more. Okay. So what does collect mean? Collecting is a way of seeing. So we have the Beckers. They photograph normal houses in West Germany in the 60s. So they make kind of a collection of everydays. So then we have Piranesi collecting the city as fragments and has heterogeneity is the basis for collecting. So the city can be seen as an exhibition of heterogeneous parts. So then we have the board introducing a relational key, and he introduced the users, and that produces the space, and it experiences it. So collecting is not an accumulation of objects, but it is a selection. The meaning of objects and things depends on the relation between them. So in contemporary art, this shift occurs very early, around the 50s, in London, around independent group with artists like Paolozzi and the Smithson and Richard Hamilton. And what they did, they invented what later became the pop art. They're ripping image from popular magazine, combining them into collages. And again, they introduced the figure of the user who is literally, use the images and create new context for them, creating new meanings. So we did the same for these IKEA pieces, which is an example for us of monumentality, new monumentality, because it is sold massively. I think everybody has this piece. It's a table lag. It costs $10, 10 euros in Europe, and $10, I guess. So, okay, we thought we create a new contest for it, and it's a piece of non-design. We gave a new frame with this beautiful styrofoam C element, creating a third element, which we call il gran conforto, after Le Grand Confort for Le Corbusier, giving, a kind of democratic design piece for everybody. So then when we face the competition for the redesign for the Linz Cathedral in Austria, so we remember our IKEA piece, and we designed a stool for everybody attending a mass. And then we gave a frame made by stone for the bishop in order to create this and underline this symbolic difference. So it's also very comfortable, much more comfortable for the bishop to sit on the wood than on stone. So we have another kind of recontextualization with a ready-made, which is this Wilfried. This we made for a gallerist, Joe Marconi, Milano. It's a mini bar. It's a bar for singles. So we create a beautiful luxury coat for this. So Palladio did the same. He actually had a beautiful stone element, giving the medieval basilica, the role of being displayed as a kind of, ready-made. So he created completely new architecture by adding two double loggiato. It is simply a circulation space. This is our very first project in Black Forest. The Black Forest is, the client was asking for an extension of this shabby shack, and we had to maintain it. We hardly tried to get rid of it, but no way. So we keep it, and we, again, add a new frame. So we have a T element, actually, and L element. And we made the old cottage empty, so giving him the role of an exhibit. So deprivate of any function. The only function was that of the circulation. So we create kind of pedestal for it, exposing him. The point is that architecture is not important here, but the relation between the old one and the new one, and the space in between. So another ready-made case, this is a Flick collection in Berlin. The Friedrich Christian Flick lended his collection to the museum state in Berlin and paid for the renovation of this old warehouse, 10,000 square meters. And we thought we could make out of it a ready-made by an inverted intervention. You see the Hamburger Bahnhof. This is close to Hamburger Bahnhof. And then the black line is a new venue for the Flick collection. So we actually create a new ready-made for an universal intervention, adding a completely new coat, this black corrugated metal facade. And we integrate all the technical devices in the roof, leaving the space completely free for the artist. This is a Sarah Morris installation, and this is Dieter Roth, the garden sculpture, which is an ongoing project. It's very interesting. It started in the 70s in Cologne with a small sculpture, and then it became bigger and bigger. So the point is that they add new pieces each time the sculpture is shown in a new venue. So that Dieter Roth is now dead, and the son was actually living inside the space, and he was very happy because he was working there, adding new pieces, thinking to be like in an atelier. So then we create this corridor, and we create a double circulation with two parcours, giving the possibilities to having many curatorial and spatial possibilities. So the corridor is all, of course, an emergency exit. Then later, the artist Richard Arschwager made this installation by simply replacing the lamps. So it's a kind of, circulation spaces where art is installed, so a double function. Actually, Vasari did the same. He did a corridor connecting heterogeneous architectural elements and creating the very first gallery and museum of the Renaissance. But then back to the Flick, we had the task to connect the Hamburger Bahnhof to the new venue, and we designed first an underground tunnel, but it was supposed to be too much expensive to get rid of the technical stuff on the ground. Then we keep the drawing as it was, and then just put it upside down, like a crash into the Flick collection, like an animal, so very violent. And this is what we call a scene machine. With these big windows, we gave the possibility to perceive the outside before entering the Flick collection. So this is a view from inside the tunnel toward the Flick, the black corrugated facade of the Flick collection. And this is an intervention of Robert Kurmirowski. We first thought, okay, they gave me the ugly bridge, exhibition spaces, then turned into, I think, a nice installation. This is a replica of a typical Berlin underground station. So again, this kind of in-between space, this is a circulation space that becomes, and it is used appropriate by the artist again. This is another project in Vienna, the Belvedere. We renovated a lower Belvedere, and we created this visual relation with the upper Belvedere. And then again, we had to connect the lower Belvedere with the Orangerie. We created a sort of pergola together with Heimot Zobering, the artist Heimot Zobering. And you see on the right side, this is the lower Belvedere and our connection to the Orangerie. So this is a pergola, which function, again, as a display for the garden outside, and also for these lines, which is the work of Heimot Zobering. It is a thermodynamic diagram, and it also prevents birds to crash into the from crashing into the glass. And this is not a McLaren, so this is not a Porsche. It's actually a work by Tobias Rehberger. He designed what he remembered of a Porsche and of a McLaren, then he sent to Thailand to artisan or counterfeiter to make a real car. Actually, it did technical support. They did a technical support. You can drive it. So you have a functional support and the image of a Porsche or a McLaren. So we thought we could do the same, facing the competition about the reconstruction of the Baroque castle in Berlin. So the competition was about, they were asking for a museum with no facade, which means that the architect, they don't have to design the facade, but they have to use the replica of the decoration of the Baroque elements completely when get lost. So we thought, okay, we could give a functional museum volume and then adding the facade as an autonomous volume again, showing the paradox of this reconstruction in Berlin. So and also we gave a visual connection with Altes Museum of Schinkel, with a kind of loggiato, which is a loggia, which is a filter between inside and outside. And this is the first step of our entry. So we designed a one-to-one scale model by brick, showing the relief and the windows, the door of a Baroque museum without decoration. Then we gave the responsibility to decorate it to the citizen of Berlin. They can buy like a column or like, I don't know, an arch or something like that. There are a lot of associations where you can, for 1,000 euro, buy something. And then this is the final entry, which shows a project which is unfinished. We like to show the process about it, the possibility to decorate it. But we gave them, a technical museum functioning without decoration. So a few years ago, we started a series of exhibition called Momentary Monument, together with artist Michael Riedel. And the point was how to show architecture, which is always a difficult task. And we didn't want to create a one-to-one scale experience, so we concentrated us on the catalog. So we did a catalog, then Michael Riedel approached us, and then he decided to show the production of the catalog. And you see, we have the catalog, and you see this kind of extension of the catalog. The black cover is the catalog, and then the extension, where are recorded all the dialogues around the production of it. So the dialogue between us and the graphic designer and the printer, and the bookshop, and so on. Again, another process that we also show in this competition that we won and we built for the Moderne Galerie in Saarbrücken. This is the existing museum. It's a beautiful architecture from the 60s. Then the point is that they started already almost 10 years ago to extend it. But then this is the ruin of the previous extension. Then they stopped because there was big scandal around it. There was a corrupt director, and so on. So then, when we faced the competition, we faced these ruins. So we had to decide whether we get rid of it or we keep it. So we kept it, and we turned into, it was supposed to be the entrance, the new entrance. So we transformed it into an exhibition. But then, together with Michael Riedel, we thought we could make out of it a kind of political display showing the scandal and all the debate around the scandal. Michael Riedel recorded the text of the dialogue between the lawyers and the director and so on, so the politicians. And then he print on this plaster all the dialogues. And we cover literally the facade and the pavement around it, showing for the first time, I mean, this is the first museum which shows his scandal on it. I mean, it is not a good advertising. So this is a view of the Pay White exhibition at the opening. And this is a view inside these kind of ruins that we found, which was it was supposed to be the entrance. Then we use it as exhibition spaces. And Comuna Fondamento, this is our intervention, Venice Biennale. It's a double intervention, inside and outside the main pavilion, the Giardini. Made by brick, we made like sort of space inside, forcing the user into the main pavilion. And then outside, with the same material, we did a pedestal surrounding the 60 trees and interrupting the axis toward the pavilion. So we have a volume outside and a space inside. And actually, we didn't want to show architecture as a document, but as something that you can use and you can experience. And so the visitors used the pedestal, the bank, and nobody recognized it as exhibit, which is, I mean, we were happy on one way, on the other hand, not so much.
I actually was very happy, I have to say. But we have maybe not all the same opinion about this. I thought we had called this approach invisible architecture some years ago, and I still strongly believe in that, because I think that architecture is not there to be seen, but it's there to make space, and the space then is to be used, and that's, I think, a very beautiful profession actually that is able to provide spaces. And when you provide a space like in the Biennale that people actually use, sit on, write their Instagram messages and so on, I think that's quite an achievement for an architectural exhibition. Now, I want to show you some images of the House of One, which is only one project I'm going to show now. To finish, we saw these art projects and the strategical moments in these art projects that Simona showed, where we always try to use one element and turn it somehow around, or use an existing element and make it visible or invisible. We always try to do with very little gestures, somehow make a point and turn a situation around that seems kind of like scandalous or somehow lost, or a lost cause, you know. The castle, the palace was a lost cause, this building ruin was a lost cause, making architecture exhibitions is a lost cause anyway, and so it was all about somehow these kind of paradoxical situations. Now we grow up, and we had the feeling at a certain point it's also important that you can be affirmative, that you cannot only intervene always in lost causes. You also have to somehow work for winning causes. So when this competition came up, it was a very striking competition. My brother immediately said, let's not do it, it's about religion. And I said, why? It's about religion, this is good actually, but it's a controversial thing, again, on the one hand. On the other hand, a mosque, synagogue and a church in one building is actually a striking building brief. I've never seen anything like that before. So we took part in this competition for the House of One in Berlin, and we won this competition, surprisingly, and we felt that this is really, for us, in a way, a very new challenge, a very new task, something we haven't dealt with. We cannot just involve an artist and solve the whole problem. We felt like now we have to really go back to a very basic thinking about architecture. So what is the architect today? I mean, is he still a generalist, or is she a specialist? We feel in the everyday we are always more specialized. We are called for an exhibition, we do interior design, we are called for facade design even. There are so many competitions now where we are just doing the facade designs. Or we are called for some kind of like collaboration with another architect where we do just the design and then the other one does all the technical planning and everything, not to talk about the building supervision. So the point is, who are we in our role as generalists? And this is one point we always address now. So can we do something that redefines our role? And with this project, we felt from the very beginning, this could be actually a project where we can redefine our role as architects, because when you have such a heavily content-driven project, somehow the architecture cannot be technical. It cannot be just nice, beautiful, or technically well done. The architect here is really somehow a curator who brings these people also together, because we are working on this project now for 6 years, and in all these 6 years, it's still the design phase. I mean, 6 years of design phase. It's of course very exhausting also, but to sit with a rabbi, a priest and an imam every 2 weeks and discuss architecture is actually quite an interesting exercise. It brings you into a different sphere somehow of thinking. And there are big traditions, of course, with these people, but it's not only about that. It's also about the fact that a rabbi speaks about a mosque all of a sudden. That is also kind of striking. How do you speak about washing the feet in the mosque with a rabbi? So this project brought us in a new role, and we feel like curators in a way. We bring these people together, we convene them in a way. Through our design, they actually reformulate the program. This is what we perceived as something very enriching in the practice, that architecture here is actually in the position to change somehow the content of the brief and of the building, because it's somehow a trial and error process in which we make statements, then they can react to it, and so on. This is how it should be anyways, but as we all know, in a normal building commission, very rarely so. With artists, it often is. With artists, you have this kind of interactive design process with curators, with museum directors, yes. But in the real world, it seems always more difficult. And so this project now for us is a chance to actually, I think, intervene in this way. And I want to show you briefly where it is located. This is the center of Berlin. It's the island. You can see the island is a little bit more crisp than the rest. The spray is around the river, and you all know the Museum Island. It's to the north and to the south, where the red mark is. That's the site. It's the site that's the first documented site of the city of Berlin. It used to be a church, St. Peter Church in Berlin. It's the first documented site in the medieval Berlin, which funnily at the time was called Köln, like Cologne. And this church has been built and rebuilt for many times, I think 5 over the period of 800 years. And then what happened is it was damaged in the war, and actually it was destroyed by the East German government, because of course politically also didn't quite fit into the GDR ideology. This is how this place looked like 200 years ago, and this is how it looks today. So it's like a completely different place, but you have these excavations of the foundations of the last church still visible. It's the one from 1850. And the question in the competition was already, would we use the foundations actually to build on top? Would we build a bridge over them? Would we somehow exhibit them like a display and then build next to it? And we decided it could be done that we actually built like an extrusion right on top of them, but not the historical church. So you use the foundations and then something else comes out. It's a little bit like this cadaveric ski game where you kind of like fold over and then something else happens, but the lines are there. So we felt like it would be interesting to test history as a foundation for a contemporary project. And this brings, of course, all kinds of consideration with it. You see here the different palimpsest-like foundations of the historical churches that overlap. And now there's also a street running over one of the side wings. So actually what is possible is this. This is the figure we then found in the competition. We can kind of cover part of the historical foundations, not all of them, because they're not all in our reach. Sometimes some are out of our project area. So it's like a T shape that comes out of it. It's not anymore a cross shape, which is better anyway. It's not a church anymore. So the first step is to build this building on top of the historical foundations and to make it an archaeological zone below. And have a very huge hall on top of these foundations that kind of house them. It's an open air basically area. You can also not seal these foundations, obviously, so you have humidity coming up all the time, so there's no proper division possible. These lower spaces will be used for conventions also, and some kind of maybe people singing or also praying there, but it's not an official sacred space. The whole idea of the sacred space actually moves up to the piano nobile. We conceived the whole building in section as a very strong divide between below and above. The above is really one floor on the first floor level that includes all of the three sacred spaces. So they are equivalent. And I think this was one of the winning arguments for our design also, that we actually designed all three horizontally linked, not one on top of each other, but really all on one level, which is a challenge with the small plan available, with a fourth space in between that links them. But then the other winning element, I think, for this design was that we designed them in a different way, that these three sacred spaces have a section and also a plan that is not the same for each of them. But if you look at them, they are really like houses. They are like three different houses linked on one floor. They have coinciding floor levels, so you can actually have a central space that connects them, but at the same time, each of them has a completely different shape, form, light, and so on. And in the competition, we even thought that the materials inside the three sacred spaces could be different. And then, interestingly, over the years, it came from the rabbi, actually, who at a certain point questioned the whole concept and said, shouldn't the three religious spaces all have the same kind of like quality of wall? And then we have all those objects that we use in order to do the function that are actually different, although they have also familiar resemblances and even etymological, as I learned so much about, for instance, the mosque and the synagogue are so similar in many ways. But what is interesting is that then we actually decided to in this next step, to make the three spaces and the fourth space, all the four spaces on the piano nobile, in the same material. And the material is the same that is inside and outside. It's a 1 meter thick brick wall. So there is no stucco, there is no plaster, there is no color, there is no nothing. It's just this 1 meter thick load-bearing brick wall that is inside like outside, that also has all the risers and shafts in it, that basically builds a massive volume out of which these three sacred spaces are sculpted in a way. And this kind of logic is then added to by concrete that will be used for all the stairs, all the horizontal ceilings and floors. So we have then exposed concrete and exposed brick, and that's it. And there is no materials except for those that come in their function now into the church, into the synagogue, into the mosque, like wood, for like metal, all of these things that come in for certain elements that you use in the sacred function. So the building is not finished yet because it also has another level up on top. It has a kind of a space that was not called for in the program. We called it a loggia, a city loggia. It's up on top, and you can actually see the city from there. And that came in the discussion during the competition when we discussed how can we talk to people like us who maybe do not go to church every week, who do not feel so closely relating to these issues, but still feel a spiritual sense of relation to the world, and who maybe want to just have a place where they also feel relaxed in this place. And and maybe there must be something that goes beyond religion. Maybe even the three faiths, and at one point in time, will have to acknowledge that a monotheistic religion is not all. And so that was interesting that we proposed this extra space, and it was taken by the jury and also by the three clergymen with a lot of favor, and they really like this idea of this space on top of the fourth space, that is a space of convening that looks like a big loggia up on top, and that speaks to the city. It speaks to the outside. It looks into the sky. It's open, and it's protected at the same time. So this very simple volume has now this softer finishing on top, let's say. So going through the floors, without being too precise, I think one can imagine how this is developing. This is the floors are kind of complicated because now having these foundational walls, we have a very constricted shape. At the same time, the religious functions have their own kind of interior needs. So we discuss interesting problems, like what happens in a mosque when men and women, maybe one day in a more liberal interpretation, will actually pray together on the same floor, not on two different floors. Then you need a larger floor, because then they can pray next to one another, maybe with a curtain in the middle, maybe not. But these are discussions we have, and then so we had to change the competition drawing quite a bit, actually, to make things like this happen. And this is the space going up on top, and you arrive at the finally up on top on this loggia level. And now the big discussion is how to make this dome. We lost this competition for the Humboldt Forum at the time because we didn't officially make the dome. That was the official reason why we got the special prize. It was, of course, also a little bit a tactic because we were not really up for the challenge to build this palace. But at the same time, the fact that we lost because of the dome, because we didn't do the dome, and it was a very clear decision by us not to make it because the parliament at the time had really not decided to make a dome, and the dome was really something that was an add-on by some very zealous people in the competition preparation team who by all means wanted this dome, and some politicians who kind of sidestepped the parliament. So it was actually a sticky issue, and we were a little bit, with all this dome question, we were a bit, how to say, not so free in our thinking about domes anymore. So here we suggested now that you can just see it on the side, this dome above the central space that should also catch some light. I don't know how that exactly will work. We are discussing this right now. It's not so easy. At the same time, we at a certain point, the rabbi said, "Oh, maybe we can do without a dome, and we save a lot of money and invest that rather into the three sacred spaces and maybe in the loggia itself, and we have more space up there." So for some months we just killed it, we took it away, but then we understood without the dome it doesn't work. So there are interesting issues that I had never confronted like this, that for us now all of a sudden become very serious issues, like building a dome and what a dome means in a religious building and an interreligious building, and a building that actually now speaks to a society that needs spaces, maybe also like this, because in Berlin we confront ourselves not only with a terrible past when it comes to how we deal with the Jewish immigration that has been so fundamental for Berlin as a modern city, but we also deal with the fact that we have a very strong Muslim immigration today, and that is actually very fundamental for how the city works today. And we don't have a mosque in the center. The mosques are all in the periphery. And this kind of hidden life, this hidden religious life of the Muslims in Berlin is a problem because it actually has to do with political representation and the lack of it. And in that sense, to make the first the first mosque in the center of Berlin, right on the island, next to a synagogue and next to a church, on the first plot of the city, is actually a very strong political statement. And so everything counts, everything becomes important, and the dome at that point is not something that is neutral. It's quite important. And the dome on the castle, on the palace, that has not been constructed by us, but now has been built by Franco Stella, usually, historically, used to be a church, a chapel. It was a chapel of the king. So we should not forget that these domes have a very strange function, and on the palace, they will now make a cross, actually. again, because they say, although it's not a chapel anymore today, the cross is part of its formal history. And so this is an interesting discussion that what is architecture there? Is the cross a symbol, or is it just a formal part of architecture we can reconstruct just like that? I would say that the House of One, as it is called now, that will be built probably from next year on, the funding is underway, will be somehow the balancing building in Berlin for the Humboldt Forum and the Kassel and the Pfalz Palace. And this is a picture of the model on site. Of course, it's a little bit too small, but we put the camera very close, so it looks a little bit bigger. Like this, it's almost real. Yeah, it's 1:500 only. You know. Still, it gives an idea. And you see this architecture around the GDR architecture is actually is all prefab, 60s GDR architecture. It's not the best quality architecture, but it's very clearly forming this part of town. It's a political history of Berlin, and it's important also to deal with that. So this is a model that is a little bit bigger. It's a 1:50 model that the V&A in London commissioned. They wanted to have this project in their collection, which is amazing, I found, because it's not yet built and they already want a model of it in their collection. So they actually paid for a model to be taken into their collection. It was also shown in a recent exhibition there. And about the future, the design of the future, and the model was made in Italy by an Italian model maker, and it's a model that you can decompose, you can take apart. It's made of 3 parts, and you can actually look inside and see the spaces and feel the spaces. Another model we made was a model of the physical volume of that interior space, so turned around basically model where you actually have the space become a volume. This was at the Chicago Biennial, the first one, where we were in the same space with Johnston Mark Lee. They were on the other side here and had to look at this model all the time. Sorry about that. But I think it looked very beautiful. It looked like a big kind of funny toy. It's strange when you represent the space through a volume, but that it clarifies certain ideas. And then we had 2 artists collaborate with us on the exhibition. Armin Linke, who took pictures. They are on the wall there. I don't show them in detail now, but he took pictures of the 3 clergymen of the project with their gestures. So it was a study of liturgical gesture. And then Marko Lulic made a video, and I can show you briefly one image of that. He made a video that we showed there, and the video was about circular dances that you have in all cultures. It's a little bit like bread and brick. There are certain things you encounter in all cultures. There are these circular dances. And so the circular space in the middle that unites the 3 religious spaces was represented by this video by Marko Lulic, who with professional dancers made a one-day shooting in Berlin where he actually had the circular dances and acted, and it really became a spatial way of choreography. So I'm showing this because for us, this model making is kind of like a way of trying to understand what we're doing in this project, how this project actually works, what it culturally means. It is so that since it's a long planning process, we have been invited to various exhibitions meanwhile, and we are showing it quite often. And we don't want to document it. We don't want to just relay it. We want to kind of like deal with the issues and the experience. So this was in the 104 in Paris, where we actually showed one-to-one floor plan. And so you could actually experience the size of it. Felt actually rather small when you were there. It's a thing we always know when we build, that it feels rather small when we start building. And it was interesting for how you used it. People, especially kids, start to walk on it more on the walls than in the spaces. So, but it had a beautiful feeling of this mark on the floor. And to talk also about the material aspect of the building, the question is how do you finance a building like this? They started with 0 money. So the 3 guys said, okay, it's a brick building, as we see now from the architecture. We need many bricks. I think it's 4 million bricks. Yeah, 4.5 million bricks will be used. So they said, okay, since the building cost will be 45 million, we have to sell the bricks. So now people can buy the bricks for 10 euros or $10, and they already raised some almost 10 million through this procedure, and now there is state money also promised to the project by the federal government, but in let's say in a way that is not being dominated by the state. So this is very important. This is still a private foundation. It's a project with initiators. It's not a project that is done by the state as a big project. And we kind of argued for an open-ended procedure where you could also maybe not finish it, where you could also say, well, let's start building and then see how far we get. This is very complicated today, of course, but this is how historically churches have been built. And I think that there's a lot to it, to not say, let's wait another 20 years until we have 45 million, but maybe if we have 20 million, let's start. And it looks now like they have an amount where they can start, and we made also some renderings of the half-finished buildings. The three clergymen really liked them. The rabbi, the imam, and the priest. They totally felt this. Everyone else said, "Well, this is negative. It conveys failure. You know, when you have a half-finished building as a rendering, it conveys failure." So we kind of look. We don't show them anymore. But I really like them, and we had them even published for a moment. You know. So. This is how far we are at now, and we hope that next year they start with real bricks and in the place. It has a lot of attention, as you see, even though it's not there yet, and it's a project that will probably last another 6 years or so, and with all the construction and everything happening. And I don't expect it to be finished and then finished like another project, and then you walk away from it and you don't hear anymore. I expect this to be a project that will raise a lot of discussions, as it did already, and it does. And for instance, the V&A, when it invited us to make this model for them, they also said they don't want to just collect the model. They want to collect the whole process. So they want to collect all the news articles. They want to collect all the drawings. They want to collect all the process that happens around the polemics, all of it, which is quite interesting also for a policy of a collection of architectural collecting, let's say, in a historical collection like the V&A in London. So this is where we're at, and I would like to open the discussion with you on the themes that we raised. I hope we could make some points, and we would be curious to discuss with you. Thank you. How does it work?
A couple of chairs out here.
Yeah.
One chair for Johannes.
No, for you.
Third party.
You're not sitting with us?
For questions.
Yes.
Well, let's start with some questions on the floor.
No, I mean, I know their work very well. I was asking during the presentation, which I liked a lot. I was asking myself why we didn't collaborate more in the past. So I'm guilty for that. And the answer was that, I mean, I was kind of scared of this sense of monumentality, which, so, I mean, you can imagine my generation was ready to break down every monumentality. So I was scared, but now I maybe understand better, or the work is more mature. And this jumping from these incredible brick walls to exhibitions to process is kind of redeeming very much this monumentality. So it's not really a question, but I think this is a very interesting aspect in the work, how you can go even to immaterial, no? As in the case of the exhibitions in Milan. And this is quite interesting because, I mean, the Berlin museum is for me, it's tough, no? It's this game that makes me feel uneasy, but uneasiness is also part, I think, of your game. So how do you live, no? This jumping from temporary to conceptual to extremely tectonic, like this last beautiful building. You never told us which is the church, which is the synagogue, which is the mosque. You know, yeah, that's interesting.
No,
I was a mosque expert when I was a young architect. Yeah,
we talked with them about swapping also, you know, like swapping, because maybe after some years they would actually understand that the other space works better. So now that we have actually the same kind of walls everywhere, and just the objects become the fitting, so to speak, I think this would be even possible. And the discussion of how far it can go with the you know, the dialogue is always very important. And I didn't show you any of the more specific specificities of the space right now, because that would leads into a whole interesting world of discussions about detail and about what a material means and what a detail and light means. Especially, we are discussing the lighting of these spaces, the artificial and the natural lighting, in much detail now, and it's quite fascinating what it means, for instance, in the mosque, what the light in the church and in the synagogue. So we could talk for hours about this, and so I kind of like try to reduce it now to the more conceptual part, but. Talking about this monumentality, because Simona said, I think rightly in the beginning, the monumentality of IKEA is actually its mass. You know, everyone has this. This is monumental today. Monumentality is, I think, in the Warhol sense, is when you are super present. What the American president with his tweets does is monumental. So the monument is not any more dangerous when it's a brick monument today. I think the danger lies in other monuments, and we should not be distracted, because I think we should be very careful where the real monumentality that could really be dangerous for us sits today. And artistic practice kind of like always turns things around, and this is how you can maybe even make a brick building that looks monumental, but actually this kind of strangeness to the city fabric is important in order to actually set apart a space where you say, look, this is a sacred space. This is not just your everyday profitable space that can be every 25 years renewed, but this is actually a different place in the city, and it needs a certain estrangement. It needs an alienation from the context. That's why I would not call it even monumental, but I would call it differently. But I also don't have a problem with the monument in the sense of what we call a momentary monument for the exhibition in Milan, where you actually say the monument maybe is more the place that has to do with time and memory, and not so much with mass and bigness. Yeah, and there we can make a very interesting discussion then about what is a monument. Maybe it can be something very light.
Can I add something? I'm answering to your question about, the shape of the moschee or the mosque or the synagogue. So actually, what is interesting for me, for us, about this project is that the form comes out from the existing Gothic. So the perimeter of the project. So we didn't invent anything. So we just follow the perimeter, and then actually the facade is very autonomous. So from outside you don't understand what is inside. So you have this surprise effect. So, and actually the spaces inside, we don't focus very much on them specifically, but we use this as historical, classical forms that we carve out from this autonomous volume, which works as a monolith somehow. So this is, for me, the interesting part of the...
I think I have an observation first and then a question. I really admire your strategy and thinking and also the work. I notice a certain in-betweenness in your work. And I use in-betweenness, as a more out of Nike sense as opposed to Venturi's both end sense, in the sense that it always oscillates from one thing to another. That I see in a lineage of your work. I see your earlier projects, framing of your first project, or building a box around a Flick collection, this kind of box-in-box strategy. I've seen other architects of our generation, like Kirsten Gears and Ben Severin, also does it. But for them, like the hortus conclusus is important. Whereas for you, this density, this oscillation between the object or the existing as found buildings and the box is more important. So, and I also see it in the House of One. And I'm thinking of the competition entries. There are many entries that focuses on the three. The Mario Botta did three. And your massing somehow is between one thing that's been carved versus 3 or 4 things that's been constructed. I see this as a lineage or temperament in your work. Huh? And I'm curious, in a way, following people's question, because we talked about how your generation in Italy reacted against the autonomy of the previous generation or against maybe the subsequent monumentality that came with it. And I'm wondering how you feel as scholars. You wrote a lot about that generation. Like you seem to embrace a certain, maybe an engaged autonomy or a type of monumentality, but at the same time with this type of looseness. So I see this kind of in-between quality between this type of architectonic work.
We should do a seminar on this word. It is ambiguous.
Yeah,
It's ambiguous, the word autonomy,
which is
peak of all the mistakes.
Yeah. So I'm curious, your thoughts on it.
Well, the architect who was predominantly influencing all of us when we were studying was Rem Koolhaas. This is clear. It was the early 90s, so it was the period in which there was this breakthrough, even in Italy, which was still dominated by the Rossiani and Gregoriani and Graziani and so on. But somehow OMA started being even there, playing a role. But OMA is also not coming from nowhere. There is a very strong relation to Ungers. And Ungers has been very strongly advocated in Italy at the time. Whereas I always felt that Ungers is a very problematic architect. Being German myself, I always felt this kind of like tectonic, almost a little bit simplified way of cutting volumes and making statements that are theoretical and then just building them. Doesn't matter if it's built in brick, cardboard, or styrofoam or concrete. It's just a concept that we build. It's not enough. Architecture needs more refinement. But at the same time, what is interesting about Ungers is his conceptual somehow absoluteness, like this kind of like cutting through things, and also playing with the whole idea of collecting. Simona started talking about collecting, and for us, collecting is very much a design method. You collect fragments, you collect knowledge, you collect heterogeneity, and then with that, you kind of build something new. Collection is somehow happening in between the things. It's somehow a new way of making relations between what's there. So you could say the House of One is also a collection of faiths. And in that sense, this is something that the city archipelago by Ungers really did. But there, Rem Koolhaas was already working with him. And so I was always interested in this moment when they worked together. And this huge influence that Rem Koolhaas had on our generation and still has, I think, which is also very important to just reflect, comes also with a certain dose of cynicism. Yesterday, Pier Paolo talked about this, the right and the left Koolhaasiani, and I think it's very important to note that. And I would say our interest in the generation before is somehow the question: Can we take this influence, this outspoken way of Rem Koolhaas, with the knowledge of Rossi and Ungers about a certain rigor, a certain also political rigor, I would say, in Aldo Rossi? And can we actually go back to a question that is not selling everything to everyone? And there you have to be at that point a little bit more critical. And then what we did with the Palace or with other projects here, I think shows that kind of critical approach where we do not fulfill the brief, we do not fulfill the task, we do our own autonomous decision how we want to do architecture and how we want to make a statement. And that we won some competitions for us was always surprising because we were not aiming at that, and we kind of like felt we'd just make the statement and then we see what happens. And in this sense, this is something Ungers did, and this is something I and also Rossi I think did, and I think this is something I really like. And I feel like we have to recycle it if we do not want to become the right-wing kind of like Kohlhaas descendants, you know. I don't know if that answers that, but...
Well, you know, those who weren't here yesterday, there was a lunchtime discussion between Pier Paolo Tamburelli and Michael Hayes presenting the assemblage, the general assemblage in San Rocco. There was one call for papers in San Rocco that was never took on. Was the call for paper was, why was Ungers such a bad architect? And I remember that the call was like, given someone so brilliant, so erudite, collected everything, why did he turn out to be such a bad architect? And I think the problem was because of this conceptual rigor that he had. But I was thinking, would it be abstraction also, his adherence to abstraction, adherence to the grid that became so strong that at the end trapped him, and maybe the generation after him, the Hungarians after him, whether it be Kohlhaas or Max Stüttler, loosened that up, and that loosened that up also for your generation, you know, that you can take Ungers with that critical distance.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. Wait, any comment?
Thanks. I have a simple technical question. I'm curious. You mentioned the dome, but you could have pushed the central dome into the loggia, yet you chose to lower it and insert a second dome, a sphere. Why did you do that?
There is a certain proportion. So I think the space shouldn't be higher, the central space. It's already very vertical, very vertical. So I think this is the limit, and there shouldn't be a higher dome. We pushed the sphere in because you have this concept in some historical places where you actually catch the light through a sphere and then kind of like bring it down into the dome, you know. So it's a light catcher in a way. With the problem that we discovered, it's actually difficult to catch light in a loggia, you know. So in that sense, at a certain point, the ambiguity of that dome became very apparent, of the dome on the dome. But the technical question, I think, is answered with the word proportion. So this building has a very vertical proportion because it's on a small plot. The plot is limited by the foundations. It's all very clear. Still, the building program is quite large. So how can you actually make things fit? You make very vertical spaces. And the sacred spaces have only 100-something square meters as a plan. It's very small. But they have a volume that is really very, very big. And there you have to kind of like always ask yourself, where is the proportion then kind of like going out of shape? And also with the mosque we have this theme, and because it's the highest of the three. And that has technical reasons again. And the question is, where is the limit? And that's really compositional. I would say in this project, more than in any other project, we are really also composing spaces. And I didn't show any of that today because that's a whole, as I said, it's a whole different discussion. But we really focus on compositional aspects of spatial architecture. And that's the opposite of abstraction. And I would say this is exactly what we should learn from Ungers, that you should not abstract. You should not make abstract architectural buildings. You should really concretely work them out. And more like a sculptor who really sees space as something that you can make, you can experience. And I would argue our spaces, the ones that we built, always have somehow a sculptural quality, so they are not just generic. This is also another aspect that we care for. In his way, yeah.
You've mentioned that spaces in the middle are spaces of circulation and also exhibition. How does that play into the role of the center space in House of One?
Well, if we look at the Bohr drawing Simona showed, I think that the idea of circulation in a city, for instance, makes the city. It's really, when you want to boil down the city to what really makes the city interesting in relation to, for instance, a village, it's the aspect of the density of circulation. Circulation is actually quite intriguing in a city. In a village, it's not. And so the density of circulation and how parts relate to each other, I think, are the crucial element of a good building. It's really about the parcours. In an exhibition, it's about how you go from one to the other and then to the third, and what that creates in your brain while you make this parcours. So it's a choreographical question almost. And I would say in the House of One, the interesting for us, from us, interesting aspect is that actually the fourth space is a square. It's like it's a square in the sense of like a piazza. It actually serves the three sacred spaces. It's necessary to circulate to reach them. At the same time, it's the one and only space where you can really meet between the three, so it's actually also maybe the most important space in the house. So maybe it's the relational space. Maybe it's the space that really marks the difference. So of course you build the building because you want a synagogue, a mosque, and a church. That's the reason. But in the end, it might happen that this fourth space is the real architectural space. It's really the space where you meet. It's really the space where you feel comfortable. It's really the space where the debate will take place also, and which actually represents the city in its infrastructural density, in its excitement, and so on. So in that sense, having all these ramps going up and around, and now we found a way to actually bring the ramp through the sphere to the loggia, and it's very beautiful because you can see down from the loggia now into the fourth space. This is something we developed more recently. I think it will be a very exciting movement, like in those old churches. When you go to Florence and you go up the dome, Brunelleschi, actually there's this moment you can look down and Antonelli and so on. Yeah.